With me, it's kill or be killed, and I'm not trying to die.
An individual like me, my mind is a torture chamber. My mind constantly prepared me for war. Every 10th of a second, quicker than your eye can blink. Tyson and Jones Jr.
Hello and welcome to a very special edition of No Filter Boxing Fight Breakdown, as we look forward to Mike Tyson versus Roy Jones Jr. on November the 28th from Los Angeles, live on BT Sport Box Office. Now, Roy Jones' last contest was in 2018, but for Mike Tyson, it was a defeat to Kevin McBride way back in 2005. So just what sort of Tyson can we expect? Well, joining me today to take a good look at this one are two well-known boxing figures. The former heavy and cruiserweight champion of the world, David Haye, is with us. Welcome, David. And in the opposite corner, a well-respected trainer and coach, Ben Davison. Welcome, gentlemen. David, I'll come to you first. When this fight was first announced, what was your initial reaction?
My initial reaction was excitement. You know, I understand these guys are past their prime, but it's still Mike Tyson, it's still Roy Jones Jr., and their brand value for anyone who's been involved in boxing over the last 30 years is sky high. And just to know what they bring to the table at such an age is intriguing. So I'm looking forward to seeing what they got.
And Ben, do you think the boxing world is excited about this contest? Do people want to see it?
I think people's definitely intrigued to have a look at it. Who wouldn't be? You know, they're two of the best that ever did it, but not only that, they're two of the most charismatic personalities, flair. If you look back at eras of boxing and fighters of the past, they are two that always come up. So, you know, to be seeing them in a ring in 2020 is a bit surreal.
Yeah, too right. Okay, fellas, let's go and take a walk and see how good these guys were. Let's start with Tyson first. Some of his knockouts. So, Ben, he didn't hang around, did he?
He didn't, you know. Ferocious intensity, you know, fantastic speed for a heavyweight, and was you knew you was in for a fight when you're standing opposite Mike Tyson.
Mean intentions with every punch, and what I believe gave Tyson his strength was he wasn't looking for one shot. He was willing to throw 3 or 4 punches in succession, and he never neglected the body as well. And I think his body punching was the reason why he got so many of his knockouts.
People used to say that he used to scare his opponents to death even before he got into the ring. Yeah. Do you think that played a big part in his game?
It played a massive part. His opponents used to come to the ring in fear for their life. You know, I remember Frank Bruno coming to the ring and think crossed himself 57 times or something on the way to the ring. That's only because he'd never done that before any other fights. It's only because the mystique of Mike Tyson was such that he was this phenomenon that nobody understood where he was from. There's no internet back then. You couldn't do any searches about his life. You didn't know any. All you knew was what you saw on television for those few clips of him just destroying people. You didn't know their record. You didn't know who they were. You just knew this young man was just destroying everyone in his path, and everybody really felt the fear.
And Ben, can you remember the first time you've seen Tyson in action?
Yeah, there's lots of old tapes and that I've got at my house, VHS tapes of Tyson, and like David said, you know, blowing people away, and at the time you don't know who they are, but you know, just a fantastic knockout highlight reel that he's got.
Yeah, yeah. And Dave, you would have been still amateur in the mid-90s, so did he have an effect on your career?
Not so much. You know, Mike Tyson, I had a very different style to Mike Tyson. I was a long-range boxer. He was a come-forward fighter. And I used to watch Roy Jones, strangely. He was my inspiration at that age. When I was 15, 16, I used to watch. He was the oracle of what an athletic boxer can do if he has his timing right. And I used to watch his fights time and time, all day long. I couldn't watch enough Roy Jones Jr.
But you used to like Big Frank as well, Big Frank Bruno.
Yeah, Frank Bruno was, you know, massive fan of his. My whole family was, and obviously when he's going to fight Mike Tyson, we're all backing him. We all believe he could do it. But just watching him come to the ring, I think the confidence of ours started to wade as he got closer and closer to the ring. And obviously Mike Tyson, the mystique, the phenomenon that is this undefeatable looking character who's just pure mean intentions from the first bell, and it's hard not to fear someone like that come into the ring.
And Ben, lastly, the look of Tyson back then, he looked like a real gladiator, didn't he? He used to walk to the ring, no robe, black shorts, black boots, just ring that bell, let's get on with it.
Yeah, a real student of the sport, and I think that his inspiration behind the whole black shorts, black boots, you know, low cut boots as well was Jack Dempsey, I believe. Loved going back, watching over the old fights, and you know, just a real personality outside the ring, and that's the big thing about these two. You know, as great as they were, you know, they got such personalities and such standout. Roy Jones, you know, people go, what a flash type of character, fantastic charisma, personality, and the same with Mike Tyson, and that's partly why they are able to do what they're doing now in 2020.
Okay, so that's Tyson. Let's just have a look at Jones. I've picked out this Jones fight because this, for me, was one of his best performances of his career and best wins against another great fighter, who was James Toney, who himself was a fantastic fighter. In this fight, I mean, the way he beats Toney here, David, with that jab. Toney himself, I think, was having his 12th world title fight here, and you know, he was 44-0, a two-weight world champion, and Jones beats him fairly comfortably.
He does. Roy Jones's athleticism here is just through the roof. This is peak Roy Jones against not an opponent. No, James Toney, in his right, was one of the best, you know, middleweights of all time. He was fantastic. Who's went up to heavyweight himself. Yeah. Fighting Samuel Peters and John Ruiz. So he's shown how great he is over the years. He beaten Vasily Durov at cruiserweight for the IBF title. That's how great Toney is. And Roy Jones made it look very easy. He beat someone out of sight. He put him down with a shot. And you know, Toney, you don't see him on the seat of his pants very often. It wasn't a clean knockdown, but it was the only way he could do it. And it was with skill, with balance and angles.
People always talk about Jones's athleticism and his physical attributes, but he had a fantastic boxing brain as well, you know, and you'll have to have a brain to be able to do what he did here to James Toney.
Yeah, tremendous performance. Like I say, I thought it was one of the performances of his career, considering how good Toney was. It was a great display. These are the heights of some of the boxers that he fought. So Lennox was 6'5". Look, if you look at Roy Jones, he's 5'11", so we can't really compare him as an opponent. Holyfield, maybe, because he's not such of a giant at 6'2½". Bruce Seldon, the shortest man he fought in a world title fight, only 6'1½". And in his 20th fight, he fights James Tillis. Now, the reason why we've looking at this one is the fact that Tillis took him the distance for the first time in his 20th fight. So we've tried to look at styles that maybe Tyson struggled against. He wins this fight against Tillis, but at the same time it was on points and he didn't have it all his own way. So if we look at this, this is the beginning of the round 3. I'll just talk through this in terms of Tillis keeping his distance.
Keeping it long. Keeping
it long, David. The previous 19 fights, he'd knocked them all out, Tyson had. But here, Tillis keeps it long, keeps him on the end of the jab.
Yeah, Roy Jones Jr. had some of the best legs in the game in terms of springing in and out of range and controlling the distance. And he's going to need to do that against someone like Mike Tyson, because if Mike Tyson's allowed to walk into range and throw an overhand right like he did against Andrew Golota or France Botha, it's all over for Jones, because he just needs that one shot. So Roy Jones Jr. is going to need to do what Tillis did there and stay up on his toes, on his feet, keep it a boxing match for as long as he can, because I believe of the two fighters, if it goes into round 4, 5 and 6, that's definitely going to suit the man who's had the training camps and the professional fights in the last 10 years.
And Ben, again, this is Tillis again in the 7th round. So this is, again, a good round for Tillis. At the start of the 7th round, the style you can clearly see, it's hit and move and keep your distance.
Yeah, you know, people often talk about Mike Tyson's height, as we are now, but he actually used his lack of height to his advantage.
What's this for a right hand from Tillis? It's coming up now. He uses his jab well, keeps him on the outside, works round here, then sort of brings Tyson. Tyson's very static, That's a cracking shot.
Yeah, and he's thrown a baiting jab, which Roy Jones loves to use himself, you know. And I think that could be a key component in this fight. I think Tyson loved it when people stepped in and committed with a jab and gave away the distance for him to be able to slip and fire one back and let you walk into the shot.
David, do you think Roy Jones at 51 can box like that at range? Will that be in his mind, do you
Roy
think?
Jones has always boxed at range, and even in the fights where he's lost in recent years, against people he would have always beaten. Let's just get that straight, you know. His footwork has always been on point. He's always in good shape. You never see him blown up between fights, putting on 10 stone like you see some of these other fighters doing. He's a constant professional. He's always in the gym. He's training Chris Eubank Jr. I saw recently. So he's always in there. He's in and around the boxing game. Mike Tyson hasn't been in the boxing game as studiously as Roy Jones has. So I definitely feel, as the fight goes ahead, I definitely feel Roy Jones will have the physical advantages in his fight. Although he has the size disadvantage, he has the boxing, the condition to be a boxer is different than looking and conditioning in the mirror. One thing, both fighters looking in good shape, but being in fighting shape, you have to have had a fight in the last 10 years, for sure. And Roy Jones has had a lot of fights in the last 10 years. Tyson hasn't, but Tyson's got the equaliser. So it sort of swings and roundabouts. Your mind goes both ways. But in a straight-up boxing match, I go with the fighter who's got the more consistency, regardless of the weight.
Okay, interesting points. Another contest I'd like to bring out is a classic. It's the Holyfield 1 contest. Now, Holyfield, we know he came up from cruiserweight, so he's not exactly a giant. He's 6'2.5". But this, for me, was the first time that probably Tyson had someone take him on toe-to-toe and pushed him back, was stronger than him. So let's have a look at the Holyfield fight. This was a tremendous contest. We all know it's a classic, but here, Ben, for the first time ever, probably someone standing toe-to-toe with him, trading and pushing him back.
He was, but he was intelligent in the way that he pushed him back. Every time they got into a clinch, Holyfield was underneath Tyson, actually making Tyson, box shorter in the clinch, underneath Tyson's chin, and was able to walk Tyson back because of his position in the clinch, and he knew how to engage in a clinch, and he was able to walk Tyson back, take that momentum away, and it proved to be the blueprint for him to win that fight, and of course the second fight as well.
Yeah, so we'll look at a little bit more of the Holyfield fight. This is Holyfield 1 again, David. This was, it was a classic.
Holyfield, when you punch Holyfield, you give him a 1-2, he throws a 1-2 back at you. You throw a left hook, he throws a left. He just gives you back what you've thrown at him. And Tyson hadn't had anyone do that before. If Tyson throws a shot, he throws a shot back. It's just how he understands. Tyson doesn't like when you do that to him, push him back. Unfortunately for Roy Jones, he's not going to be physically big enough to do this tactic. But, it shows that, even at this time, Mike Tyson was a massive, massive favourite here.
Yeah, he was, yeah, exactly.
And it took Holyfield's true belief in himself to overcome what seemed to be an impossible task. And here we go, Roy Jones again. I'm sure people are making him a big underdog, but if you got the heart and you're willing to go through it with Tyson, people have shown time and time again that is possible.
And Ben, obviously Tyson there was 30 years of age. He was 45-1 in his record. Only Douglas had beaten him. It's a classic fight, but like I say, when it was toe-to-toe, 9 times out of 10, 10 times out of 10, Tyson always came through. But that's probably the first time where he was on the receiving end of someone using similar tactics.
It was, but like I say, it was also the height, I believe, played a factor. The way that, if that's a tall guy there, it's very hard for a tall guy to push back the smaller guy with the lower sense of gravity. Someone built like Tyson, but Holyfield was able to do that, very smart in the clinch, extremely strong, as he showed, and was able to take that momentum away from Mike Tyson. But like David said, I don't believe that'll be the approach that Roy Jones will be taking.
Okay. Lastly now, let's just have a look at Buster Douglas here, using his jab well, keeping his distance against Tyson. Tyson's trying to come forward. It's late on in the fight now. He's getting a little bit tired, but the jab was critical here.
Mike Tyson's always been very square on as he holds his hands right in the middle of his face. Usually when his head's moving like it is there, he's okay, but as he gets tired in fights, his head stops moving, which means he gets hit with more jabs. The more jabs he gets hit with, the more the momentum of Buster Douglas, and he starts to fall apart. Roy Jones Jr., you know, he's a master at distance and using that jab. His jab isn't the hardest jab, but it's crisp and fast, and the jab's normally setting something else up. He'll get you feinting, he'll get you pouring with a jab to hit you with a left hook, or he'll show you the jab and come over with right hand. When Roy Jones moved up to heavyweight for the first time in his career against John Ruiz, who was the WBA champion, he used his jab excellently in that fight to control a much bigger man. Now, Ruiz is 6'2", 6'3". I fought him. I know how tough he is, and he completely nullified his attacks with his jab. His jab was one of the major keys in that because it was crisp, and he mixed his hard jab, his quick jab, with a crisp left hook.
And Ben, I suppose one of the big questions is, with Jones being 51, is he young enough? Can he box at distance still, or can he actually, is he strong enough to take Tyson on? Which one is he going to do? Or is he going to do it, in your opinion, or is it a little bit of both that he might do?
I think the benefit to Roy Jones in this situation is he's not going to have to go looking for Mike Tyson, I'd imagine. I don't think he's going to have to get in distance, out of distance. I think Tyson will be closing the distance for him. And actually in that clip there, the Douglas jabs, there's lots of different ways you can throw your jab, and Douglas isn't actually stepping in with his jab. Tyson's closing the distance for him. He's actually jabbing and stepping back, reopening the distance to give him options to throw with variety with other shots. Not having to, I think it'd be a different matter if it was somebody that Roy had to use his feet to get in and out of distance. I think Mike would be closing the distance for Roy, and Roy won't have to go looking for him, and I think that would be an advantage to Roy.
Ben, you've been studying Tyson's fights and his style. When he first came onto the scene, he was knocking guys out left, right and centre. But you don't think he got the credit he really deserved. Why was that? You know,
it's often that people, when somebody's extremely good at something and knocking people out, and Tyson was ferocious, let his hands go, high punch count, it's very easy just to put that into a simple explanation, but when you actually go back and take a look, you know, he was an intelligent guy, and you don't box at that level without a boxing IQ. He was extremely well drilled at this point in his career, and here, as often the occasion, boxing a guy who's taller than him, and very often he liked to use the opponent's punches as an entry, splitting the jab, getting underneath them, and each time, you know, a big guy is letting his hands go at Mike Tyson, they're leaving gaps and opportunities, and that takes a skill to exploit, you know. Here you'll see it in slow motion in a second, where Johnson's throwing shots at Mike Tyson. He's, you know, getting underneath him, getting out of the way of him, finding the angles. And of course, you know, when you're letting your hands go, a big man against Mike Tyson, you're leaving him with opportunities to big gaps here for him to exploit, and to find this gap here at this quick, at the intensity that a fight is taking place at. That takes skill.
Yeah, David, he was a tremendous mid to short range boxer, wasn't he? But his head movement and the way he used to make those opportunities and those openings, it was brilliant, really.
His head movement, for me, is the reason Tyson was as successful as he was. He wasn't the biggest heavyweight, but he was explosive. He wasn't even the biggest single puncher. It was the fact that he used to get into range and throw clusters of punches together and break you down to the body. Very few heavyweights threw good body punches, but Mike Tyson, as you saw then, you slip to the side, and you need 12 inches is all he needed to literally whip those little left hooks into the body, and the fight was either over or the guy was stunned, brings his hands down, then he brings the big hooks up to the top and he closes the show like he did against Larry Holmes. Body assault, bring the arms down and then throw combinations to the head. His head movement, if it wasn't working, which happened as he got older and ran out of steam, once his head stopped moving, he started eating the jab. The moment Tyson started eating jabs, things start to unravel. So when he was younger, he unraveled very rarely because he was fit and he was fired up and he kept his head moving continuously.
Okay, David, thanks. And Ben, we'll just look at another one that you've picked out, which is the Larry Holmes fight.
Yeah, this is just an example of Tyson using the opponent's punches as an entry, you know. He's up against an old savvy veteran against Larry Holmes, who ties him up when he gets close. But like David said, you know, the head movement, but the important part was he was well drilled and getting in distance while moving his head. And that was a key point, a key factor in Tyson's style, and that's an example of it against one of the best jabbers in history. But like I say, Larry Holmes, an old savvy veteran, knew to tie him up when he got close.
And let's have a look at another one here. Obviously becoming the youngest heavyweight world champion in history. The Trevor Burbik fight. Everyone remembers this one.
Yeah, I picked out this clip here as a moment because it's a great example of a variety of jabs that Tyson had, and in this one you'll see when it goes into slow motion, you know, he slipped inside, threw a jab that drew the counter off of Burbik for Tyson to get outside and again find the gap. If you threw punches at Tyson, he was going to make you pay for doing so, and there's an example of him throwing a probing jab to draw the counter for him to find the gap.
And David, do you remember that fight? It was incredible, wasn't it, Burbik? 86?
It was, and the jab, the head movement and the jab, people underestimate Mike Tyson's jab. They just think he was a hook merchant, which he was, but he used to get into range with head movement and throw a stiff, crisp jab. Big 6'3", 6'4" heavyweights wasn't expecting to be out-jabbed by Mike Tyson, but a lot of them found themselves at the end of his jab because he used to come in so aggressively, close the range of his feet and keep us safe. Head off the line with his firm jab, and once they're knocked off balance, that's when he let his hands go. So yeah, the Trevor Burbik fight was when, for me, it really hit home about his power. As he hits Burbik gets down, he gets up and falls back down again. You know, rarely do you see the heavyweight champion being destructed so easily by such a young heavyweight, and that for me was his legacy fight.
And Ben, you want to make another point about the Larry Holmes fight?
Yeah, just exaggerating on the point that David made. You know, here's him out jabbing one of the best jabbers in history of Larry Holmes. Mike Tyson had a phenomenal jab in his peak. And like David said, he's splitting the jab there, letting the opponent's jab go over his shoulder, which was very important. When you're boxing bigger guys, taller guys with a longer reach, you have to find a way in. And for him, splitting the jab was a good entry for Mike Tyson to then start to implement what he was known for in his compact bent arm shots.
Great stuff. Well, let's move on to Marvis Fraser. This was a really destructive display.
It was, and this is an example of another type of jab that Tyson's using, probing jab, occupying the opponent for him to then find gaps, put them in a shell for him to be able to let a variety of shots go. But as Fraser's trying to come out the corner there, it's an example of Mike Tyson where in this moment here, he's actually boxing as a southpaw, and people often talk about switch hitters as back foot type boxers, but he was able to hit you with both hands. If you stepped across, he didn't have to reposition himself all the time. He was able just to switch stances, fight and punch and box you. Well, I say box, but more let his hands go as a southpaw. Brilliant ring IQ here, cutting the ring off, not following his opponent. And again, going back to a probing jab and forces Fraser back into the corner. Not with a jab that he's trying to snap somebody's head back. He's just occupying the opponent, walks him back to the corner, traps his opponent to then be able to unleash what looks here as a right uppercut from hell.
Because I knew he was thinking about that shot for about 30 seconds before it landed.
But
just,
you know,
awesome power, David.
Yeah, Marvis Fraser, very good. Obviously, coming from a fighting background. His father, the late great Smoking Joe Fraser, and Mike Tyson, he just unfortunately born in the wrong era to be a heavyweight at the size that he was. Maybe if he was born 30 years prior, he would have been an okay size heavyweight, but you needed to be significantly bigger than Mike Tyson to be able to beat him at that time, as Buster Douglas showed.
Great stuff. Well, let's move on. Ben, another example here of Tyson, explosive power, and there was real structure and craft behind his work.
Yeah, this is an example of Tyson using his lack of height to his advantage. You know, he'd get extra low, forcing the tall opponent to box down at his height. Yeah. And as a tall guy, when you're jabbing downwards, look at the gap that it's leaving here. You know, it leaves you very vulnerable, and Tyson used that to his advantage, got very low, forced his opponent to jab down to him, which left gaps upstairs. He's also thrown a jab to the body as a disguise to then find the shot over the top, you know. So just trying to exaggerate the points that he's a lot smarter.
It wasn't just crash bang wallop. It wasn't just crash
bang wallop, and you try that at world level and you very quickly come unstuck.
Yeah, very much so. Yeah. And Ben, finally on this contest, another point that you want to make?
Yeah, just exaggerating that point there where Tyson would, you know, he's throwing a jab here, disguising, giving the opponent something to look at to then find the shot upstairs. In this case, it's a jab to the body that is making the opponent look at, getting himself low. The opponent reaches for it, finds a gap upstairs, gives him the same look, this time comes around with a left hook. So, as we're saying, you know, he's a lot more intelligent at implementing his style than what he's often just given credit for.
And David, may I say, similarly to yourself, you wasn't the biggest of heavyweights, but you liked the opponents to throw that jab and then you'd whip over the top with that haymaker right hand.
Yeah, I understand how having the lack of arm length against a bigger guy, you have to draw out their jab. Yeah. And if you want to get in close, you've got to slip their shot and get into range. But you have to be brave enough to move into the shot. If someone throws a right hand, usually you want to move away from the right hand, whereas if you want to slip it, you got to come into range. It's a dangerous shot. You have to have good reflexes and be confident with your movement, because if you do it half-hearted, you can get caught right in the middle, and that's the wrong place you want to get caught. So I understand how Mike Tyson needed that quality head movement to get into range. When people are trying to land a jab on a smaller guy, they step in with it sometimes. And if you're quick enough to move out the way, you're then loaded to counter with him.
So if he gets it right, with the opponent coming forward,
yeah,
he's coming forward,
doubles the impact, doubles the power, and stops the bigger guy from getting too fresh with his jab, because he thinks, last time I tried it, I got cracked with his shot. So, and that's all you need. You need a big guy just to think about for a split second that I can't just freely throw a jab, and then you can relax, and then you can implement what you're looking to do in the fight.
And I think looking at that style, boxers then who fought Tyson really didn't want to throw that jab, did they? Because they're scared to throw it in case that right hand comes over the top.
That's exactly what happened, taking an opponent's jab away, and that was how Mike Tyson did it. In a different way to David, where David would sort of have his feet planted, draw the jab to be able to stay where he is and bring the opponent onto his shot. Tyson also had to be well drilled to bring his legs into play, to travel while moving his head to close the distance for him, because people weren't opening up to go towards Mike Tyson, He had to close the distance for him, had to be well drilled to do so. And like you say, taking away the opponent's advantages of their height and their reach, and not allowing them to establish their jab, and he done that extremely well.
Ben, we've looked at Mike Tyson, and now we want to look at Roy Jones, and there's some good things that you've pointed out about his style.
Yeah, people often talk about, same as Mike Tyson, where we know, ferocious puncher, punches and bunches, great variety. They are those things, but they're a lot more. And the same with Roy Jones, athletically, what an athlete, supremely gifted. But again, he's a lot more than that, and these are just a few clips to try and explain that.
Okay, so let's have a look at the James Toney fight.
Yeah, this is an example against James Toney, who, what a phenomenal fighter, but he knew James Toney likes to defend out of the shoulder roll stance. When you're defending in the shoulder roll stance, similar to Floyd Mayweather, they like to roll the shoulder, come back with the right hand. And here's Roy Jones spinning off around the outside, taking away that counter, making Toney have to punch across himself, exactly like that, and took that away from him. And that takes great IQ, and these are just some examples of how Roy Jones was a lot smarter than what he was given credit for. Athletic ability in itself is not going to get you there.
And David, I know he was one of your favourite fighters also.
Yeah, Roy Jones was, the way he controlled the range, the distance, his foot position. He was such an athlete. He'd play like a semi-professional basketball match the night of a light heavyweight world title fight. That's how supreme he was in his era. There was no one who could touch him, and the likes of to beat James Toney so conclusively with skills, when James Toney was supposed to be one of the most skilled fighters on the pound for pound on the planet at that time. A lot of people didn't feel Roy Jones would win that fight, but he won it in good style.
And Ben, let's look at the Gonzalez fight, because there's some points you want to make on this contest.
Yeah, this is an example of I call it playing with distance. His head's over his front foot, baiting the jab from the opponent to find a gap to exploit from the opponent. In this example, he gets clipped with a left hook as he's going round, but guess what? Smart, intelligent fighter. Next time, defensively responsible, knows what to expect. You're not going to catch me with that again, son. What a brilliant IQ to make those adjustments there and then. And those adjustments throughout a fight are really what separates someone who's good and someone who's great.
Well, that's one of the things that I found when I boxed him in the Olympic Games semi-final. I've got the height on him, but he had the reach over me, believe it or not. I'm 6'1.5", and I got a reach of 73. And he was like 5'11", but I had a reach of 74. So the traps that he used to set that I found against him was he would literally lean over his front foot with this low hand here, and then as you're coming forward, you think you're in range to hit him, and then before you know it, bang, he's got you with a fast jab or a fast hook around the side. Lightning fast reflexes and fast hands, but those are the traps that he used to set.
And so that's a perfect example that you've mentioned there. So although you're first by the punch, he's actually first in what's happening. He's saying to you, go on, Richie, throw this punch.
You got it.
So although people look at it and go, oh, you know, a counter puncher is often second, but actually he's dictating. He's saying to you, making you throw that shot, draws that shot, and makes you pay for doing so.
Yeah. And Ben, another point that you want to bring up about the Gonzalez fight.
Yeah, in this example where Roy Jones throws a jab, notices that Gonzalez is overreacting with a parry, and makes him pay for doing so. You know, in this example here, he's the trajectory of the left hook comes from low to high. As you can see, Gonzalez is actually going to expect a body shot here, curls him, but how many fighters would you expect a body shot to come from that distance from? Not many, but because of Roy Jones' athletic ability, he's able to hit you with a left hook to the body from that distance. So it made it very hard. There he's thrown a feint at Gonzalez, again, overreacted with a parry. Does the same again, and he's always the old cliche of downloading information. And you know, although he was athletically gifted, phenomenal ring IQ, notices that, doesn't make him pay straight away, gives him a different look, resets himself, and makes him pay for doing so in a second here of that overreaction with a parry. And that again, that's ring IQ. It's not. You don't get that by being athletically gifted. A great runner can't do what Roy Jones is doing there, you know. He's got a phenomenal boxing brain. I've been lucky enough to sit down and have discussions with him, so, you know, I've heard him talk boxing. Fantastic commentator as well when he was working with HBO. So, you know, he's more than just an athletically gifted athlete. He's a real boxing genius.
And David, yeah, I was just going to say, we all know how good the jab was of Roy Jones, but some of those hooks there were just
his left hook, his left bicep is probably twice as big as his right bicep. Seriously, have a look at him. When he does his bicep curl, his left hook was so dominant, and he could hit people with 5 or 6 left hooks in a row. That's unheard of, because he's got this weird way of being able to recoil his muscles. I've never seen another fighter do it like that, but he managed to do it against some of the very best fighters of all time. And you know, that shows to me, one thing looking great against average guys, there's nothing looking, you know, great against good guys, but when you can look great against other greats,
that's the key.
That's the difference. That really is the difference. And you know, that's why for me, Roy Jones has been probably my biggest boxing idol in terms of what he does in the ring technically. Why I probably watch more of Roy Jones's fights. I used to watch Roy Jones in the change room before my world title fights. I used to have him on in the background, his fights, just in case some of the Roy Jones magic would come over me. It's just like to understand and see how controlled he was in his prime, in his peak. I've never seen anyone control the ring, the referee, everybody. He used to rap to the ring. He's done it all. He had some of the biggest, the most impressive ring walk entrances. You know, the crowds he used to bring, the pay-per-view numbers. He would every department he cleaned up in. And you know, to think about him getting in the ring with Mike Tyson, you know, at any time in their lives is a magic moment, and I have to see what happens when it happens. I
mean, I think it's fair to say that Mike Tyson has been an inspiration to many boxers, but so has Roy Jones Jr. Yeah,
I think that, you know, I know we're in 2020, fully aware of that, but I think that the actual clash of styles we're talking about when they was in their prime is you know, if you're over-aggressive against Roy Jones and you make mistakes and you try to force things against him, you're going to get made to pay for doing so. And it's the same with Mike Tyson, you know, if you're too aggressive against him, you're going to play into his hands. And I think the clash of styles would have been, and hopefully will, you know, be a great boxing spectacle. And I just hope that both fighters leave the ring with their health intact and everybody's safe. And I hope that it's a great one for the boxing fans.
Okay, guys, let's have a look at both Mike Tyson and Roy Jones in training for this contest. David, he looks in pretty good condition there. Yeah,
he does look like much speed has been lost. If he can somehow maintain what he's doing here on the pads in in multiple combinations per round, you know, it could be pretty devastating. But how many can he? That's the question, is how many rounds can he maintain this pace? Roy Jones, on the other hand, has boxed, you know, in the last couple of years. So he's had hard training camps. He's been in there. He's had the rounds of sparring. You know, 2 years out of the ring is a long time, but it's not as long as what Mike Tyson's had out of the ring. And Roy Jones showing more in terms of combinations. Mike Tyson's combinations are 5 or 6 punch combinations max. Roy Jones here is throwing significantly more than that.
And Ben, you've obviously been involved in training camps with Tyson Fury, who had long layoffs, and then you had to work with Tyson both physically and mentally. How difficult was that in terms of getting a boxer back on track who'd been away from the ring for a long time?
Yeah, it was extremely difficult, you know, and I know that we knew that it was going to be a long process. It wasn't an overnight thing. We knew that the comeback fight was more about the event and a stepping stone on the comeback. And to be honest with you, even up to the first Wilder fight and the ESPN fights and BT Sport fights that were in Las Vegas, you know, they were all part of the comeback. We knew that it was going to take time, and probably up until late 2019 when he started training for the Wilder rematch, the second fight, we knew that, especially after 5 fights in a short space of time, very, very good to get that rust off. But on top of the weight loss, we knew that he would have needed a rest to then start preparing himself. And only now you'll start to see the best of Tyson, because he's got over what it took physically, mentally, emotionally. You know, it's very draining and takes a lot out of you to prepare yourself for a big fight, on top of taking 10 stone off, coming back from mental health problems and dealing with those. So it wasn't an overnight thing like his first fight back, he's going to be back razor sharp, you know. We knew that it was going to be a process, and overall it's probably took a couple of years. But I think now you'll start seeing the best of him, and I know, you know, this is probably a one-off special event, so it's a bit of a different situation. But I think that, you know, both guys have seemed to be in fantastic shape, and you know, I just hope that it's an entertaining one.
And David, you had a long period off, didn't you? 3.5 years.
3.5 years, a couple of operations, 3.5 years. It wasn't through anything other than injury. I wasn't physically able to get back in the ring within those 3.5 years. Mike Tyson, on the other hand, may have been. There was no one particular injury that I'm aware that he had that kept him out. He just retired, as you know. He lost his last couple of fights, Danny Williams and Kevin McBride. He kind of just fizzled out. So I'm not sure if what type of training routine he's implemented throughout his life, but I think the way they've both spent their retirement since their last fights will have a bearing on the result of this fight. I really believe that. I don't believe boxing is a sport we can walk away for 10, 15 years and expect to come back and compete with anyone at any weight. I think it's that type of sport. So I'm leaning, I know we're not going there yet, but I'm leaning towards the athlete who's stayed in the boxing game over the last decade.
That's important, isn't it? I remember boxing into my early 30s, and the aches and pains after the training sessions the next day, they seem to be harder to shake off.
They are. And
now I'm thinking of Mike Tyson, 54 years of age. He's been away from the game for 15 years. You yourself, you had 3.5 years out of the game. Was there more aches and pains for you?
Yeah, as I got into my 30s, I had a lot of aches and pains, a lot of injuries, a lot of physio appointments. You know, I'm 40 now, and I ache after training significantly more than they did in my 30s. And I'm sure it doesn't get better when you get to your 50s. But regardless, both fighters have that fighter's heart. They're both living legends. They're both going to have to summon up something for one night and everyone's nights of entertainment. They've done it so many times over the years. They've given so much of themselves to the sport of boxing, and I think they just want to give one more big night to the fans.
Does it inspire you maybe to get back in the ring one day? These are in the 50s. I
want to see how it goes first. let me see how it looks. Let me see how it looks, and I'll let you know.
We've got a good trainer here, you know.
Exactly. It's a great sport, boxing. What I don't like is when you see an older fighter. I didn't like it when Roy Jones, for instance, got beat by Danny Green. I didn't like that. It was horrible to see. Or even Antonio Tarver was bad enough. Although Antonio Tarver is one of the all-time great light heavyweights. You know, he's done it. But because I was a Roy Jones fan, I didn't like seeing him lose. And I believe if a younger fighter who's just fresher is able to beat someone like Roy Jones or Mike Tyson, I don't like that. I don't mind either one of these guys because they're the same generation, same age. I just don't like seeing a younger guy who's just younger and fresher beating the older guy. That's why I'm happy that Floyd Mayweather's kind of calling it a day, fighting real fighters, and he wants to fight some YouTubers, because the last thing you want to see is a living legend getting beat by someone just because they're younger. You know, I'd rather him jump in there with another legend.
And Ben, if you had to train either Tyson or Jones, what areas would you target in terms of, you wouldn't train them like they're a 20-year-old kid, would you? Surely.
No, you wouldn't, you know. You'd have to be careful of intensity, have plenty of recovery sessions in place. To be honest with you, you'd probably have a team that specialises in that area, you know. A physiologist, masseuses, nutritionists, to make sure that they're recovering the best they can and be the best they can be and the healthiest they can be for their own sake when they get in there on the night. But, you know, putting the boxing aside, two fantastic personalities, you know, that, and characters, and across the board, you know, we know Mike Tyson's been through the highest of highs and the lowest of lows throughout his life, and Roy Jones is just a purebred fighting man with such charisma and that. So,
but looking at the fight itself, do you think Tyson would probably go for an early win here? I mean, I know there's no sort of decision.
I fully understand.
Well, I can't see these two holding back. I think they're going to go for it.
No, I fully understand what you're saying, but
it's only 8-2s, 2-minute rounds, but still.
But 8-2s at a high intensity is still hard work,
absolutely.
you know. And
I wouldn't fancy it.
Is he going to be able to do that for 8-2s and keep that intensity? You know, I'm not so sure of. I think that it'd be a smarter approach from both of them to play the game a little bit. But like you say, probably not going to happen.
Nature of the beast, isn't it?
Exactly.
David, what do you think?
You can't tell Mike Tyson and Roy Jones Jr., two men who've probably got the biggest egos in boxing in history. These two guys really believe they're living legends, and when they get in the ring with each other, exhibition, no exhibition, they don't care, whatever the rules, they're both fighting men. They've both done it for a very, very long time. You know, longer than I've been alive, and they're going to go at it. I know it. They're not going to go out touching and moving. They're both going to want to make a statement, and I want to be there when it happens.
And you know, your opinion. Who can come through? Who can get the better of the opponents?
They say the last thing you lose in boxing is your punch. And Mike Tyson singly punched. He is the biggest puncher, one of the biggest ones in heavyweight history. You know, you saw George Foreman, age 45, come back and knock out Michael Moorer. The punch power, never. He wasn't winning the fight, but he had that one punch. Mike Tyson, they said, knocked out Andrew Glotto with one punch, knocked out France Boto with one punch. He's able to take people out with one shot. Clifford Etienne, one shot. If he lands that shot on Roy Jones Jr., if he hits it flush, if Roy Jones leaps him with a big left hook and he throws her hand right, it's good night for Roy Jones Jr. Can he summon that speed that's required to land a shot? On the pad works and on the bag, what I just saw then, that looked good enough for me. But can he do it on a moving target? When someone's very fast, pipping you with jabs, it's hard to set yourself in that position. And Roy Jones is difficult to corner if you're a middleweight or a light heavyweight, let alone a 54-year-old ex-heavyweight champion. It's going to be very interesting, but I cannot see how Mike Tyson is going to keep Roy Jones still enough to land his combinations.
Do you think, Ben, 2-minute rounds are going to favour Tyson rather than Jones? Yeah,
it probably would do, because like David said, you know, Roy will probably be the better conditioned out of the two. So it probably will favour Mike Tyson, but yeah, it's one I'm looking forward to, but I'm going to sit on the fence. So Richie, who do you...
Well, I actually think, personally, I think that Tyson, from what I've seen there, like David says, if he catches Jones, I think he could maybe force a stoppage. I know it's an exhibition contest, but you know, nature of the beast, and I think they're both going to go at it, and I think Tyson could do it. I think for Jones, his problem is to keeping Tyson at bay. That's going to be a big problem. Tyson's naturally a bigger man, so I'll put my neck on the line. I think Tyson will do it. That's me. I
disagree. I think Roy Jones. I think Roy Jones has competed in boxing a lot, you know, in the last couple of years. And I think those training camps he's had, he's a very clean liver. We've seen Mike Tyson, you know, over the years balloon up in weight. That doesn't help boxers, I guarantee you that. So I just don't think the way Mike Tyson's lived his life for the past 15 years, since he lost to Danny Williams, has been in any way, shape or form beneficial to what he's going to need on Saturday night.
Okay, guys, and you just hope for a clean fight, and they both
you know,
come out
look,
of it safe and well.
I want to sit on the fence because, you know, these two guys, as well as their ability, their ring IQ and studying them for that, you know, personality-wise, if there's one, I've been lucky enough to sit down and have a conversation with Roy Jones, and, you know, sometimes they say you don't want to meet your idols because you can be let down. Couldn't be any further from the truth. When I met Roy, you know, it was a fantastic conversation, back and forth, that's disagreed on some things, and he actually thanked me for the discussion and the back and forths at the end of it, and I was, you know, extremely overwhelmed to be able to do that. And with Mike Tyson, if there's one person I could sit down and have a conversation with in the right frame of mind, it's him. You know, like I said before, he's gone through the highest of highs and the lowest of lows, an extremely wise man, and yeah, I'm going to sit on the fence, and I just hope that both men are healthy when the fight's done.
It promises to be a fantastic fight. What Tyson shall we see? What Jones should we expect? Don't miss it on November the 28th, live on BT Sport Box Office.